just received an answer to a letter that I wrote from a pal who marched away.
Multi-purpose arena in Moline, Illinois, Wharton Field House. Today we will explore the history of a historic multi-purpose arena in Moline, Illinois, Wharton Field House, which has been hosting a great variety of events since 1928. My name is Curt Roseman. I'm a geographer by profession. I'm now retired, and I'm a person who dabbles in local history. I wish to acknowledge the Rock Island County Historical Society of Illinois, who made this presentation possible, and I sincerely thank Diana Hall for producing and editing this video. This presentation is drawn from a new book researched and written by Diane Moore and myself. The title is A Century of Players, Performers, and Pageants, Wharton Field House and Browning Field, Moline, Illinois. Browning Field is the companion facility next to Wharton Field House, which has hosted football, baseball, and a variety of community events since 1912. We gratefully acknowledge the Moline Preservation Society for their support, and also Ben and Lois Larson McAdams, who provided additional support for the book project. Many other individuals and organizations have helped in various ways. They are gratefully acknowledged in the book, and we hope we got them all. This book was published in 2014 by Heritage Documentaries, a Quad City-based nonprofit organization dedicated to the creation of documentaries, books, and programs telling the stories of diverse peoples, places, and events of the past and present. Previously, Heritage produced 2 books and 2 video documentaries. Their covers are shown here. Please visit our website, heritagedocumentaries.org, for further information. When the new Moline High School opened in 1915, its gymnasium became the site of Moline basketball games. In the early 1920s, however, someone observed the following, quote, "The growing popularity of basketball produced such a congestion at the games in the school gymnasium that only the hardiest enthusiasts could endure the discomforts of attending. A movement was born to fund and build a new facility, not only for basketball, but also for a variety of community gatherings and entertainment activities." During the winter of 1926-27, a committee including Moline High School athletic manager C.W. Holmgren, coach George Seneff, and architect William Schultzke took a field trip to gather information on other arenas. Because no large high school arenas had been built in Illinois, they went to Indiana, where basketball was thriving. Some of their ideas for the Moline Arena were hatched in the Hoosier State. One of the places they visited in Indiana was Logansport. No doubt the Logansport connection was established by Reverend W.A. Steinkraus of Moline's First Baptist Church. Before moving to Moline, he had lived in Logansport and helped that community plan and fund a new 5,000-seat high school gym, which opened in January 1927. The new gym was called the Berry Bowl, after the nickname of the Logansport High School teams, the Berries. That's as in Loganberries. The Indiana trip and other research revealed that the best method would be to create a volunteer organization to issue bonds. So the Maroon and White Association, an independent group headed by Theodore Finley Wharton, was created. In the spring of 1928, the association raised a total of $175,000 through the sale of bonds. It truly was a community effort. A total of 155 volunteers sold bonds to a total of 1,200 people in the community. Nearly $50,000 was raised by Moline school students in a bond sales competition among high school classes and among elementary schools. The juniors beat the other high school classes, and the Garfield students won the competition among the grade schools. Both are honored by plaques mounted in the lobby of the field house. This sketch is the first rendering of the field house design, drawn by William Schulze in December 1927. This view is from the southwest, showing the building as it would have been located in today's Browning Park, which is just west of Browning Field. Two main entrances would have faced 16th Street. However, it was not feasible to build at that site. So in February 1928, the decision was made to build on 20th Avenue, north of Browning Field. The field house, after having been completed, is shown here in the upper left, just north of Browning Field. Preparations for construction began in May 1928, and by September, the superstructure was in place. Then by December 1928, the field house was completed. William Schulze, designer of the field house, was one of Moline's most prolific architects. Among his other notable landmarks are the 1930 Scottish Rite Cathedral, the 1931 Art Deco Fifth Avenue building, and several other downtown Moline buildings. Here he is admiring his seating plan for the new field house. The Moline Field House was dedicated on the evening of December 21st, 1928. It featured a high school basketball game between Moline and Kewanee, and a college game between the University of Iowa and Marquette University. At the dedication ceremony, this engraved loving cup was presented to T.F. Wharton by board members of the Maroon and White Association. Frank Allen, who 5 years later would donate his mansion to the Moline schools, made the presentation. Today, Wharton Field House is the second largest high school arena in the United States, built before 1930. A small number of historic collegiate arenas also remain from that era. Two were dedicated the same year as the Moline Field House, 1928. In the upper left is Hinckley Field House at Butler University in Indianapolis, which was the largest college basketball venue from 1928 to 1950. Below is Williams Arena at the University of Minnesota, also opened in 1928, which was expanded in 1950 to become the largest. Now I will take you on a tour of some of the events the field house has hosted over the years, roughly in chronological order. Let me warn you, by the way, that along the way we'll have a couple of quizzes. The first large crowd for a high school basketball game was on 10-cent night, February 21st, 1930. In this photo you can see lots of people standing on the main floor, as bleachers had not yet been set up there. Also notice the 8-foot-high net surrounding the basketball playing floor. A major event, the Quad Cities Pageant of Progress, was held at Wharton in 1929, 1930, 31, and 37. In addition to exhibits and entertainment, 3 of those pageants included public weddings. Here's a photograph of the 1930 wedding party. A total of 6,522 people were on hand to witness that wedding. And here are some of the exhibits at the pageant in 1937. One of the most popular and long-lasting events at Wharton Field House began there in 1929 and continued for 28 years. The Moline Kiwanis Club hosted an annual series of dinners and programs, especially for local farmers. At first, the chicken dinners were served, as was the case in this 1930 scene. Later, the dinners were abandoned and the event primarily featured entertainment. Here's an advertisement for the last of these parties in 1956. Okay, it's time for the first quiz. Who was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world in 1931? No one knows? Well, it was Max Schmeling. In 1931, two of the most prominent boxers in the world visited the field house, champion Max Schmeling and also Jack Dempsey, who had been champion from 1919 to 1926. On the right is a diagram showing the seating arrangement on the basketball floor for boxing and wrestling. 1,260 seats are shown, meaning that up to 7,000 spectators could be accommodated for boxing and wrestling. Nearly that many attended the Dempsey fight. The big band era was in full swing when the first famous orchestra showed up at Wharton in 1936. Others would follow through the 1940s. This Jan Garber show offered dancing until 2 a.m. Moline was a pretty wild place at that time. One of the more spectacular events at the field house was the Deere & Company 100th anniversary celebration in 1937. The 7 programs, held over 6 days, attracted a total of 35,000 Deere employees and their family members. In addition to vaudeville acts and other entertainment, the movie The Blacksmith's Gift, starring Monty Blue, was shown. Here's Monty on the far right with other performers on the stage. Quiz number 2. Who won the very first NCAA college basketball national championship? No one knows. Here's the answer. Here's Puddles, who of course represents the University of Oregon. Quite a few college basketball games were played at Wharton in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Some of them involved local teams from Augustana and St. Ambrose colleges. One highlight was in December 1939 when Augustana took on the University of Oregon. Earlier that year, in March, the Oregon Ducks had won the very first NCAA National Basketball Championship. As we might expect, Augustana lost to the Ducks 57-22. In 1940, the field house ownership was transferred from the Maroon and White Association to the Moline School District. Then on July 1st, 1941, the name of the arena was changed from the Moline Field House to Wharton Field House, after Theodore Findlay Wharton, who was the main driving force behind the creation and early operation of the facility. Wharton passed away 2 years later at age 73. In January 1943, some 4,800 people crowded the field house for the game between Moline High School and Paris, that's Paris, Illinois, which the Maroons won 37-34. It was the first defeat for Paris since the previous year. Unfortunately, Paris turned the tables on Moline 2 months later, defeating them in the state final game in Champaign. It was a similar story the year before when Moline beat Freeport at home in the big arena, but lost to them in the first round of the state tournament. And it happened again with Quincy in 1945. The Maroon went at home and a loss in Champaign, where Moline finished 4th. Quite a number of war-related events were held at Wharton Field House during World War II. Included was a 1943 exhibit of war materials manufactured by John Deere at its Moline and East Moline factories. Here's one scene from that event. In the 1940s and early 1950s, the Tri-City Symphony Orchestra played concerts at Wharton Field House for Moline school children. On Monday morning, May 7th, 1945, 2,500 boys and girls listened intently to the concert for an hour and 15 minutes. Upon the completion of the concert, the announcement was made that the war in Europe had ended. A wild celebration ensued, and kids streamed out of the arena. With all the noise, most children could not hear the announcement that school would be canceled for the remainder of the day. In 1946 and 1947, these two circuses visited the field house. The fine print in the advertisement on the right includes the following: positively the greatest array of circus stars ever assembled. high wire trapeze acrobats, monks, chimps, and clowns galore. And Professor Kellers was to bring along his jungle that included killers, lions, tigers, panthers, pumas, elephants, and hyenas. A barnstorming female basketball team, the All-American Redheads, appeared at Wharton in 1947 to deliver some basketball comedy antics and play men's rules against a local team from McKay Plumbers. The Redheads were led by Hazel Walker, who at the time was called Miss Basketball. Walker's team lost to the Plumbers, but Walker defeated plumber Mel Motts at the free throw line. She sank 15 consecutive shots and added 5 more in a row on her knees. Motts hit only 13 of 15. In the late fall of 1946, the professional basketball Buffalo Bisons moved to Wharton Field House to become the Tri-Cities Blackhawks. This January 2nd, 1947 photograph shows Coach Nat Hickey and player Nick Gruensweig watching 7-footer Don Otten jump at the Blackhawks' first practice. Hickey and Gruensweig were wearing Buffalo Bison uniforms because the Blackhawks uniforms had not yet arrived. The Blackhawks played their first 3 seasons in the National Basketball League against teams such as the Oshkosh All-Stars, Waterloo Hawks, and the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons. Some African Americans had played in the NBL for very short periods in the early 1940s, but it was not until 1946-47 that 2 African Americans played full seasons. Pop Gates of the Blackhawks was one of them. This actually predates the first African American player to join the baseball major leagues. Jackie Robinson did not play for the Brooklyn Dodgers until the spring of 1947. This photograph of the Blackhawk team, about 8 feet wide, hung for many years in downtown Moline taverns. Today it is displayed at the Wonder Why Tap on 16th Street, just 4 blocks from Wharton Field House. Featured on the left is Billy Hassett, and on the right, Whitey Bonita. While the Blackhawks were playing there, this cubicle scoreboard was installed at Wharton Field House in the summer of 1949. It was one of the very first of this type to be used in any arena. While the Blackhawks were charter members of the National Basketball Association, the NBA, in 1949, and played 2 seasons in that league before moving to Milwaukee. And here are the 1949 through 1951 members of the NBA. Red Auerbach, shown here at the Field House, coached the Blackhawks during the 1949-50 season, then went on to a legendary career as coach of the Boston Celtics. In 1948, the city of Moline centennial was celebrated. Events were held over 6 days, and numerous activities were at Wharton Field House, including a fashion show and 2 nationwide radio broadcasts. Here's quiz number 3. What was the name of Gene Autry's horse? That's too easy. Of course, it's Champion. 1949, Champion visited Wharton Field House and brought with him Gene and some other humans. Also in 1949, Joe Louis, heavyweight boxing champion since 1937, appeared in an exhibition match. The book is full of very interesting stories that we gathered, and here's one of the best. This was told to me by Milt Johnson, who grew up in Moline. Milt and 3 of his teenage buddies had become accustomed to sneaking into the field house for amateur boxing matches. They would simply knock on the window of a locker room, and someone inside would open the window and let them slip through the narrow opening. So naturally, the lad showed up on the night of the Joe Louis fight and knocked on the window. A gruff-sounding gent said, "What do you want?" They replied that they wanted to come in and watch some boxing. The gent replied, "Go around the front and buy a ticket." After mentioning that they had no money, Milt heard a voice coming from the other side of the locker room. "Let the boys in." It was Joe Louis himself, having his hands wrapped in the dressing room. After slipping into the room, Milt looked at Louis and thought to himself, he was the biggest man I ever saw in my life. He must have been very big in heart as well. Professional wrestling was very popular at the Field House from the 1950s through the 1980s. One of the first big names to appear was Gorgeous George, who in 1950 took on George Temple from Hollywood, brother of film star Shirley Temple. The caption for this Rock Island Argus photograph reads in part, "Although he visited a hairdresser yesterday afternoon, Gorgeous George didn't derive any extended benefit from the treatment. Gorgeous, his golden locks in wild disarray, flips George Temple over as they maul each other on the floor." Among the most memorable and lasting offerings at Wharton Field House were the Easter sunrise services, held each year from 1948 through 1973. These services would start at 5:45 or 6 a.m. The first one, in 1948, attracted 5,800 worshipers, and in later years, upwards of 6,000 would attend. For the Water Follies, the world's largest stage and pools were set up at the Field House floor. Together, 2 pools held 80,000 gallons of water. The Strangler visited both the Field House and downtown Rock Island in January 1955. Speaking of wrestlers, one of the most popular pro wrestlers was Vern Gagne, who visited here many times. Here is Gagne proudly posing with Ben McAdams of Moline at the 1996 NCAA wrestling meet at Williams Arena in Minneapolis. These 2 advertisements appeared side by side in the March 1st, 1956 issue of the Rock Island Argus. They represent 2 rather different offerings at the Field House. Victor Borge of piano comedy fame, and Bill Haley and the Comets of rock and roll fame. One of the more unusual shows, Captain Kangaroo came in 1959 to perform with the Tri-City Symphony Orchestra. This Argus photograph shows 3-year-old Molly Millette of Burlington, Iowa, at the concert with her mother. Mrs. Millette was quoted as saying the following, "This appearance of the beloved captain was the only thing Molly talked about for weeks." In May 1959, the Miss Illinois Beauty Pageant was held at the Field House. Miss Moline, 20-year-old Suzanne Johnson, was crowned Miss Illinois by the reigning Miss America. For well over 100 years, Moline High School and Rock Island High School have had a significant rivalry in sports and other activities. In 1959, Rock Island High School opened a large arena rivaling Wharton Field House in size. An arena seating capacity competition ensued, both claiming well over 6,000 seats. Jack Dye and George Van Goren, who wrote on Moline High School basketball, noted Wharton would accommodate many more people if its seats were as narrow as Rock Island's. According to them, Wharton seats were 18 inches wide and Rock Island's were 16 inches wide. We couldn't resist checking this, so we measured seats. Indeed, as of January 2013, virtually every seat at the Rock Island Arena is 16 inches wide. Virtually every one at Moline's Wharton Field House is 18 inches wide. The current capacity of Wharton is slightly lower than Rock Island's, but Wharton's would be larger if its seats were narrowed to 16 inches. In 1961, Soviet gymnasts visited, and this visit prompted Moline Dispatch writer Jim Llewellyn to praise both visitors and hosts. Quote, "A champion Russian Olympic gymnastics team and a crowd of some 2,500 in Wharton Field House did their own parts last night toward breaking down cultural and communication barriers that exist between the two countries. One spoke through the grace, strength, and continuity of motion of a fine performance, and the other responded with goodwill and applause." In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, many high school games at Wharton attracted well over 6,000 fans. In March 1963, a record high school basketball crowd of 6,538 attended a super sectional tournament game. Rockford Auburn defeated Aledo 62-51. The town of Aledo could have stuffed its entire population of 3,080 in the field house that evening and still left ample room for Auburn fans. In a 1964 Moline High School game against Iowa City, a naughty little hawk caused this damage to the backboard. Fieldhouse manager Ed Lemon is shown here attending to the matter. But it wasn't the first time. Back in 1957, Moline's Vern Johnson was the first to shatter a backboard at Wharton Field House. On May 2nd, 1964, the Montana Centennial train stopped in Moline as part of a national tour. Inside some of the cars were displays celebrating Montana history, including Western art, big game trophies, and $1 million worth of gold nuggets. Riding on the train were over 3,000 Montana residents, which according to the Muscatine Journal included, quote, cowboys, cowgirls, Indians, musicians, mule skinners, and state officials. The capstone event of the day was an evening gathering at the field house where Montanans entertained the assembled Midwesterners. Big-time entertainment continued at the field house in the 1960s, but after about 1970, few nationally prominent entertainers came to Wharton, preferring other Quad City venues such as the Masonic Temple and Coliseum Ballroom in Davenport. And beginning in 1993, the mark of the Quad Cities in downtown Moline, which is now the iWireless Center. On October 26, 1966, 74-year-old Paul Douglas arrived to campaign for his fourth term as United States Senator from Illinois. He brought along a young Ted Kennedy. 10 days later, Douglas would lose the election to Charles Percy. On a chilly October evening in 1968, Richard Nixon, the former vice president, was greeted at the Quad City Airport by 4,500 cheering fans. Then the next afternoon, 6,500 packed the field house to hear and see the future president. Some 4,000 others were turned away. The 1968 visit of Alabama Governor George Wallace, who was running for president, created considerable controversy at Wharton. A staunch segregationist, Wallace attracted some 6,500 people to Wharton. Among them were 200 vocal protesters, mostly students from Augustana and Black Hawk colleges, who opposed Wallace's racist views. A high school basketball highlight at Wharton was a television broadcast, for the first time in color, of the Moline-Galesburg game on February 15, 1968. The Maroons won 67-65 over the Silver Streaks, who were the top-ranked team in the state at the time. The Harlem Globetrotters visited Wharton most years between 1950 and 1993. Before their 1971 visit, a contest was held for boys and girls who were asked to respond in 25 words or fewer to the statement, "I like basketball because." Winners were announced at this Saturday gathering the day before the Sunday game. The massive crowd that showed up for the game on Sunday frustrated promoter Mike Fitzgerald. He said, "Cars were backed up across the Mississippi River Bridge. It was one of the saddest days of my life. We had to turn away at least 3,000 people. Kids were crying all over the place." Over the years, many student activities have been held at Wharton. On the left is the 1971 festival at which high school students would sign up for organizations and activities. On the right, the arena is being decorated for the 2013 Sadie Hawkins Dance. Girls high school basketball began at Wharton in 1974. On the right is a 2010 photograph of Markeisha Harris, who was named to the All-State team 3 times. The attractiveness of Wharton's interior is clearly enhanced by the banners that are hung from the rafters. These banners commemorate the 10 times the Moline girls have gone to the Sweet 16 level in the state tournament. Interscholastic girls volleyball competition began at Moline High School in 1975, and the team began playing home matches at Wharton Field House in 1997. The Quad City Thunder played at Wharton in the Minor League Continental Basketball Association from 1987 to 1993. Their home attendance averaged over 4,000 per game at the field house. In 1993, they moved to the Mark. In the late 1990s, attendance steadily declined, and then the team and the entire league folded in 2000. And here are the teams in the league between 1987 and 1993. Ann Potter DeLong, pictured here in 1989 at the field house, owned the Thunder from 1987 to 1996. She was named CBA Executive of the Year in 1988-89. The field house was the only CBA arena where beer was not sold. It was also older and smaller than many of the other CBA arenas. In the Thunder's first season, Rockford Lightning coach Charlie Rosen called the field house a phone booth. The next time he was in town, someone brought in a cardboard phone booth and set it up in the midcourt before the game. During that and subsequent Rosen appearances, a telephone ring was blasted over the public address system, and fans would chant, "Charlie, Charlie, it's for you." In 1997, the original raised basketball floor was replaced. Here, volunteers cut the floor into various sized pieces. The countertops in the press box on the arena floor are made from sections of the old field house floor. So are sections of various sizes and shapes that can be found today in homes and businesses of Moline High School fans. A large piece of that original floor, which includes the center circle and the block letter M, is hung from the rafters above the east balcony in the field house. Surrounding it are banners listing Moline boys basketball All-State honorees. 2 Moline boys have received All-State basketball recognition twice. Whitey Verstreet in 1954 and 55, and Travis Wilson in 1997 and 98. Verstreet went on to coach the Maroons from 1979 to 1985. Wilson holds the all-time career scoring record for Moline with 1,654 points. Several children's literature festivals were held at Wharton in the 1990s. The 19th annual in 1998 attracted 500 students and teachers. That year the event was named after David Collins, a Moline teacher and author of children's books who founded the festival. In the 21st century, Wharton Field House no longer hosts big-name entertainers, politicians, preachers, or pro wrestlers. The arena is devoted primarily, although not exclusively, to school-related activities. But it's still a busy place. The field house is used 50 weeks a year, 6 days during most of the weeks. It is only closed for 2 weeks before school starts in late August. During the school year, Wharton is used daily for practices and competition in boys and girls basketball, volleyball, wrestling, and track. In the summers, volleyball, basketball, and other athletic camps are held there. The days of the big arena being filled to the rafters on a regular basis for basketball or other events are gone, but good crowds still show up for some basketball games, such as this Moline Rock Island contest in January 2013. However, One annual event still fills the place to the rafters, the annual Moline High School graduation ceremonies in May. At the 1978 50th anniversary celebration of the Field House, grandsons of Theodore Finley Wharton, Richard and Russell Wharton, returned the loving cup that was presented to their grandfather at the original 1928 dedication. It now resides in a Field House trophy case. They also presented a plaque to Moline High School on behalf of the Wharton family. Richard Wharton, shown here on the right, said, quote, "This is a symbol of tradition and spirit here, and may you never lose that in Moline. May Wharton Field House last another 50 years." We trust that the tradition and spirit embodied in the rich history of Wharton Field House will continue well beyond the 50 years predicted by Richard Wharton. For more information on this book, please visit the Heritage Documentary website, heritagedocumentaries.org. Thank you very much.